Okay, everyone, sorry about that. There was a quick distraction or issue I needed to take care of, so I had to cut that video, but I'm just going to pick it up in a part 2 in this video. So what we were just talking about is this list of conditional goods here. So Kant says that all these things, talents of the mind, qualities of temperament, gifts of fortune, he says all of these things are goods that, if they're in the right hands, they can be used well, but we can also see how they can be used for great evil and great destruction. So the question is, well, what is it that ensures that we use our understanding well? What is it that ensures that our confidence goes to a good purpose? What is it that ensures that our power, riches, honor, and health, that these things are positive contributions to the world, that these are goods? And he says the only thing that can ensure this is that a goodwill. Because he says, look, our happiness can inspire confidence and quite often overconfidence unless a goodwill is present to correct these bad tendencies. So the only unconditional good in Kant's view is a goodwill. And now, so what does goodwill mean? Well, we already said the will is your ability to form intentions to act in certain ways. And so a goodwill is just the proper use of that capacity. It's just forming the proper intentions. Now, there's a few things I'll say on this point. First, that's a very sort of vague explanation. As we go further through Kant's groundwork, we'll understand more precisely how it is we use our will properly. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is, if this is the unconditional good, if forming a good will is the lone unconditional good, then you can already see how different this is from a consequentialist ethics. Remember, consequentialists hold that, well, intentions don't matter when we're thinking about the actions themselves and if they're good or bad. So Mill said, look, if you save someone who's drowning in a river, whatever your intent was is irrelevant. That's still a good action. But Kant's going to say, no, in my deontological moral scheme, in fact, intention is all that matters. All that's really important is that you use your reason to form the right intentions to act. That is the highest unconditional good which we should all be aspiring to. Okay, so obviously we're going to need a little more explanation about what the goodwill is. And we can see here, right, he makes this exact point about how all these sort of gifts of fortune or all these unconditional goods can go wrong. So he says moderation in affects and passions, self-control and sober deliberation are not only good in many respects, they even appear to constitute part of the inner worth of a person, but they're far from deserving to be declared good without limitation, however unconditionally praised they were by the ancients. So this is a direct reference to Aristotle and some others, but more specifically Aristotle. Remember, for Aristotle, one of the virtues was temperance. It was having the right sort of attitude, having the right sort of, essentially controlling your desire for pleasure properly. Now, and so Aristotle said temperance is one of those core virtues. And Kant says, of course, moderation is of course important. You don't want to be an immoderate person. You don't want to pursue pleasure to too high a degree. That's an important thing. But even we can't say that's good without limitation, because again, the criminal mastermind who doesn't get distracted by pursuing immediate pleasures will be a more efficient, a more effective criminal. So we can't say that these virtues that Aristotle thought were so important, Kant says we can't say those virtues, courage and temperance and benevolence and justice, we can't say that those are good without limitation. And I really like the way he describes this here. For without principles of a goodwill, if the goodwill does not correct one's actions, they can become most evil. The cold blood of a scoundrel makes him not only far more dangerous, but also immediately more loathsome in our eyes than he would have been taken to be without it. So why is this? I mean, compare two criminals. Compare a criminal who's sort of a bungler, doesn't have any good intentions, obviously, is trying to defraud and steal from people, but always messes it up, just doesn't quite have what it takes to carry through a plan. I mean, obviously, we're not going to praise this person, but you're not going to really reserve your most stringent criticism or hatred for this person. you might kind of pity them. Be like, oh, look, he can't even get these criminal schemes right. But then if you think about a criminal mastermind who's ruining people's lives, causing death or impoverishment to many innocent people, and this is someone who has confidence, they have intelligence and understanding, they are gritty, they're not going to give up in the face of obstacles, they always seem to find a way to get what they need done. This person we're going to see is much more dangerous. So Kant is appealing to here these intuitions that we have when we're looking at a person, and this makes complete sense, right? When you're looking at a person and you're saying to yourself, is this a good person or a bad person? You're not primarily looking at the various qualities they have, even mental qualities, right? So you're not quite primarily looking at, is this person courageous? Is this person intelligent? No, you're looking at, what are they trying to do? What are their intentions? Because we think, well, their intention speaks to what sort of person they are. If they're a person that intends to form bad plans that are morally wrong, then we say this is a morally wrong person. If what this person is intending to do is to do good things in the world, to help others, to be just, then we say this is a good person. So for Kant, because the will is what, first of all, is what separates you from other beings in the world, then the will was also the means by which we evaluate you. And if you have a good will, you're a good person. If you have a bad will, you aren't. And having a good will involves forming the right intentions. Right? And so this is just the point. When we're asking, is this person a wealthy person? We're asking, does she have a lot of money? If we want to know, is she a smart person? Well, can she work out new complex problems? Is she courageous? Does she willingly face danger in various circumstances? But is she a morally good person? Does she make proper use of her will? Does she form the right intentions to act? Okay. Now, there's one other point, because you'll recall I told you previously that interestingly, in this list of conditional goods, Kant includes well-being, contentment, and happiness. And this might seem very strange, because again, although they meant different things by this word, Aristotle and Kant both thought happiness was the highest good. Right? Of course they meant different things, but they both thought happiness was the ultimate good. And Kant says, well, no, it's not just a conditional good. And you might wonder why that is, because happiness doesn't seem to be like these other things, right? I can see how obviously you could use power well or badly, or understanding well or badly, but how can you use happiness well or badly? When would we say happiness is a bad thing? So here's how Kant explains this. He says, a good will thus appears to constitute the indispensable condition even of the worthiness to be happy. Now, there might be some cases where happiness makes one better at doing bad things. I think Kant mentioned before that happiness can inspire confidence or overconfidence. But more fundamentally, ask yourself this question. Are there any situations where you see someone who is happy and you think the fact that they're happy is a bad thing? Now, you might immediately say, no, happiness is a good thing. Mill told us that the point of morality is to introduce as much happiness in the world as possible. Well, it's not always clear that's the case. So imagine some very powerful, wealthy, rich person who got their power and their money and all the enjoyments that go along with it by defrauding people, by destroying people's lives, by cheating people. Now you can imagine this person is quite happy. You could deny it. Aristotle would say this person deep down isn't really happy, but I think we have a sense sometimes that no, this person really is happy. They're living just the kind of life they want to live. Right? Their goal was to become wealthy and powerful and rich by cheating people, and they did just that. But then we say, is their happiness a good thing? And Kant's going to say no. Because having a good will is a condition of being worthy to be happy. Kant would say, well, look, this person's happy, but they don't deserve their happiness. They don't deserve their happiness because they got it in a morally corrupt way. They got it in a morally corrupt way because they had a bad will. They intended to cheat people, to deceive people. And so one thing that Kant is going to focus on for him is much more important than actually being happy is deserving to be happy. Because now, think about the flip side. Think about someone who acts the right way, who does the right thing, who is kind to others, who is just, who doesn't deceive or cheat people, who helps out when they can. Think about that person. But then let's say that they're just horrible tragedies in their life. Let's say they have, a family member who's suffering from a horrible illness. They get laid off from their job and they're in impoverished economic circumstances. A genuinely good-hearted, good-willed person who just has all sorts of unlucky things happen to him. On the flip side, we say this person's not happy, but they deserve happiness. And when you hear that story, you say, I really wish that this person was happy. And so for Kant, he's going to say, look, deserving to be happy is much more important than being happy. How do you deserve happiness? You deserve happiness by having a goodwill, whether you ultimately get it or not. And that's why even something like happiness, at the end of the day, ultimately is just a conditional good. All right. Now, the way to really see how different this theory is from consequentialism, it's important to take some time with the following passage. So this is one of the most famous passages in all the Groundwork. So he's explaining to you just what sort of value the goodwill has. He says a goodwill is good not because of what it affects or accomplishes, not because of its fitness to attain some intended end, but good just by its willing, i.e., in itself. And he goes on to say in the next part of the red bolded passage, even if by some particular disfavor of fate or by the scanty endowment of a stepmotherly nature, this will should entirely lack the capacity to carry through its purpose, if despite its greatest striving it should still accomplish nothing, and only the goodwill were to remain, not of course as a mere wish, but as the summoning of all means that are within our control, then like a jewel it would still shine by itself as something that has its full worth in itself. So what is he saying? He's saying, look, the goodwill, when you act with the proper intention, when that action might have good consequences, it might have neutral consequences, it might have bad consequences, right? As he says in the above passage, even if you're forming the correct intention to act accomplishes nothing, right? So you have a plan and it doesn't really do anything good or bad. Or even if it produces something bad, then your goodwill still shines like a jewel all by itself and has its full worth in itself. Okay, so how is this possible? How could the best laid plans, which have bad or just neutral consequences, how could the intent to form that plan still shine like a jewel all by itself? Well, one way to think about it is this. So suppose you decided that the right thing to do is to give to an effective charity. Okay, so you say, well, I have some, disposable income, I have some extra money, I think I want to make the world a better place, I want to help people, so I'm going to donate this money to this charity. And let's say for whatever reason, there's a clerical error, not discovered by you or even, or fully the organization. Because of that clerical error, the money just gets wasted, it gets misappropriated, it doesn't do the good that you thought it was going to do. Now, when you look at this person, you might say, well, how do we evaluate this act? Are we going to hold this individual responsible for the fact that her goodwill ended up having a neutral consequence, maybe even a bad consequence, depending on how the money was misappropriated? Well, Kant will say no. The will to do the right thing was there. The correct intention was still there. And so, for that, we still see that the benevolent intentions of this individual shine forth like a jewel all by themselves. And what Kant thinks this shows is that the goodwill is valuable in and of itself. It would be great if the goodwill always produced good consequences. But even if it doesn't, it's still good. And of course, as he said earlier, it's unconditionally good. Okay, so you can see just how different this is from consequentialism. The value of the goodwill does not depend on the consequences. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, this can't be right, because, I mean, I can go around all day just sort of wishing or intending to do good things and then never bringing them about. So you say, oh yeah, I have an intention someday to give to charity, but you never actually do it. But you really, in your mind, you say, oh, I definitely intend to do that someday. Well, just to be clear, Kant says that's not going to count. He says, when we're talking about the goodwill, he says, not are we talking about, of course, a mere wish. So when we're talking about a goodwill, we're not saying, oh, I'll just maybe make a plan and wish and hope it comes about. No, he says, to exercise your goodwill, you not only have to inform the intention to act, but you have to summon all means that are within your control. So to exercise your goodwill in the case of giving to charity would involve, yes, making the plan, saying this is what I'm going to do, but then actually following through, getting your money from your account, transferring it to the charity, etc. So intending or exercising goodwill is not a mere wish. It is an active procedure where you act as far as you can, with as much, to whatever extent's in your power, you try to bring your plan into action. Okay, so this idea that a goodwill can be good all by itself, admittedly, is somewhat strange. And there's a couple of scenarios that might help make it a little more clear why we would think a goodwill is good all by itself. So these are a couple of cases I take from John Callanan in his book I mentioned last time, which are meant to explain this idea. So first he says, consider the misunderstood hero. Consider, for instance, watching a silent comedy. Here we frequently appreciate the humor of the situation because we are capable of distinguishing the intentions of the agent on the screen and the outcomes of the consequences of his actions. If our hero sees that a lady has dropped her purse and he picks it up to return it to her, only for her to turn around at the last second and, seeing him holding her purse, think that he has just stolen it, then our enjoyment of the scene as she hits our hero over the head with her umbrella is based on our understanding of how the actions that were the result of his morally good intentions were misinterpreted. So in this case, what is funny about the scenario? What's funny about the scenario is that the hero attempted to do the right thing. The hero attempted to return a purse to this lady who had dropped it. The hero had the morally right intention, but that intention was misinterpreted, as often happens, right? And because it was misinterpreted, she ends up hitting him over the head with it, with her umbrella. So he was trying to do the right thing and actually suffer the consequences for it. But of course, in this scenario, our laughter is based on the fact, well, that's funny because he didn't actually deserve that. Now, consider a different sort of scenario. Callanan says, suppose for a moment that our hero is stuck in a universe where everything he does is destined through the power of some evil comedy demon to end up being misinterpreted in this way. Every time he tries to help someone out, it is interpreted as being an attack. In this universe, he is cursed with cosmic bad luck. Every time he tries to do something good, it turns out badly for him and for others. He tries to pick up someone's purse and ends up bumping heads with the other person bending down, and so on. The question is, if this person, from the beginning of their unfortunate screen life to the end, has caused nothing but these negative consequences, if all they had ever done was to generate injury and distress and the condemnation of others, would we say then that they were an immoral person? Would the will of this person be a morally bad one? For Kant, the answer would clearly be no. This person is just unlucky. There's nothing about them, there's nothing about their will is bad. This person is just unlucky, and that's why this person produced bad consequences. And for Kant, that's just further evidence that morality isn't about consequences in the first place. Now, Kant admits that this idea of his is somewhat strange. He says there's something so strange about this idea that we might sort of arise some suspicion about it. And why would that be? I mean, there's a certain sense in which the idea is putting forth is somewhat unnatural. And to explain why, consider how you react when someone accidentally hurts you, right? And just take a simple physical example. Someone accidentally stubs your toe. Now, upon reflection, if you think about it, you know that this person wasn't trying to do that. They didn't have any bad will towards you. They weren't intending to harm you. They just maybe accidentally tripped and caused this stubbing of your toe and caused you to feel pain. But in that moment, none of that matters to you. You could actually find yourself becoming extremely angry with this person, even though nothing in their intentions was bad. And so when you think about the fact that we react so strongly to the consequences of people's actions, even if we don't really think they're responsible for them, we might think, well, we need some more support for this idea that morality really is all about having a good will, having the right intentions. And Kant gives further support for this in an argument where he talks about, or he considers the following question: what was the purpose that nature had in giving us reason? And more specifically, he wonders, what is the purpose, what was nature's purpose in assigning reason to our will as its ruler? Now, this is a sort of fancy or sort of imagistic way of referring to what we'll call practical reason. So what is practical reason? It's just the ability to decide how we will act after a process of reasoning, or the ability to influence our will through reason. So your will is how you make choices. It's how you form intentions. You say, well, what choice should I make? What intention should I form? If you exercise practical reason, they say, well, let me think about the options. Let me consider the pros and cons. It's just you using reason to decide what to do. That's all practical reason is. And when you exercise practical reason, your reason is ruling your will. Your reason is in charge. And as we'll see, of course, your reason doesn't have to be in charge. Just sort of instinct could be in charge. But there are times that we allow our reason to control our will. And Kant's question is, well, that's interesting. I mean, why do we have reason? Why is reason able to control our will? Because in other species it doesn't. In his view, dogs and beavers, for instance, they just act on instinct. A beaver doesn't need to think or reason about what to do before it builds a dam. It just instinctually builds a dam. And you could say, well, human beings could be like that. There's no reason why we couldn't just be instinctual animals, but we aren't. We have reason. And that reason can influence our choices and what we do and how we act. So why in the world is that the case? That's the question he's trying to address. Right? So when we think about how our will produces outcomes, basically how we use our will to decide what choices we're going to make, sometimes reason can rule, sometimes instinct, and so our question right now is, why do we even have this at all? Why do we have reason that's capable of ruling the will? And he addresses that point in the following paragraph. This is 4.395. I'm not going to read through this whole thing. So below, I'm going to break it down into an argument. But the argument he's making in this paragraph, I'm going to call the purpose of reason argument. Okay, so let's take a look at the argument. So the first premise, and remember, he's just trying to explain why it is, or he's trying to explain what is the purpose of practical reason. Why do we have reason that can influence our will? So the first claim he makes is that every faculty in a living being is the most fitting or most suitable faculty to achieve the purpose to it assigned by nature. Okay, so I'm going to call this the propulsiveness of life principle. And here's the way Kant explains it. In the natural predispositions of an organized being, i.e. one arranged propulsively for life, so in all organized living beings, he says, we assume as a principle that no organ will be found in it for any end that is not also the most fitting for it and the most suitable. So he said, the idea behind this premise is that everything about you, everything from your physical constitution to your mental constitution, your psychology, and every part of that, we're going to assume is the most fitting for whatever end it's supposed to bring about, or the most suitable. So the eye, for instance, is meant for seeing, and according to this principle, the eye should be the most fitting or most suitable way of achieving sight. And of course, for individuals who think in this manner, the eye is a great example, because the eye truly is a marvel of natural engineering, and does produce sight actually quite well. Now, of course, the way this premise and the purposiveness of life principle is set up, though, we might question, especially now with our knowledge of evolution by natural selection. Because even the eye, of course, it is, of course, as I said, a marvel of natural engineering, but many people have poor eyesight. Our eyesight deteriorates as we get older. We need eyeglasses to improve it. And if you look closely at the structure of the human body, there's actually all sorts of ways in which the human body is not, and really sort of natural beings across the animal kingdom, are not necessarily set up in the most efficient way. Right? That there's a lot of examples of what one might call poor design in nature. So, on the one hand, look, we may not say, stated in the very strong way that Kant states it, this premise is probably makes a claim that's a bit too stringent. But another way to think about this, which makes it a little more plausible, is just to say, well, every part of your psychology, every part of your being, is at least not poorly suited for its end. And that, even to a certain extent, not completely, but to a certain extent, sort of is consistent with evolution by natural selection. Evolution doesn't select for the most efficient means of producing any end, but at least the things it constructs should be somewhat well suited to their purposes. Otherwise, you wouldn't survive. Okay, so that's the main claim. The main claim is that every faculty, every organ of your being is, we'll just say, well suited to the end assigned to it by nature. All right, so that's the first premise. P2. Now, one of the faculties, one of the abilities we have is practical reason. We already talked about what practical reason is. The ability of reason to influence the will. And Kant describes human beings as beings with reason and a will. Okay, so if you put those two claims together, the claim that every faculty in a living being is best suited for its particular end, and human beings have a faculty of practical reason, that means the human faculty of practical reason is the most fitting or suitable to achieve its purpose given by nature. So there's a couple things here. There is some purpose of practical reason. There's some end. There's some goal that practical reason is attempting to accomplish, or it's meant to accomplish. And it's going to be well suited or best suited to bring about that end. So at this point, there are two questions you should ask about this first conclusion. One, are there any purposes for which practical reason is poorly suited? Are there any purposes for which you would say, look, I'm not sure why we have practical reason, but it's definitely not for that. Right? Practical reason is very, very bad at bringing that about. And then a second question, what is the natural purpose that practical reason is most suited for? Now, in this argument, Kant really focuses on the first question. He's going to identify a particular end that he thinks practical reason is not well suited for at all. And what is that end? So P3 of the argument, if the purpose of practical reason was human, and this is a quote from Kant, preservation, prosperity, and happiness, then practical reason would not be the most fitting or most suitable end to achieve its purpose, or most suitable faculty to achieve its purpose. And here's where he explains this point. In a being that has reason and a will, if the actual end of nature were its preservation, its prosperity, in a word, its happiness, then she would have made very bad arrangements. Okay, so the she here is referring to nature, or Mother Nature, right? Here's his point. If the purpose of having practical reason was to make us happy, was to make us prosperous, was to give us a life of enjoyment, then Mother Nature really must have screwed up. Because in Kant's view, practical reason is not the surest path to happiness. Reason in general is not the surest path to happiness. Okay. He explains in the following passage, for all the actions that it has to perform with a view to this purpose and the whole rule of its conduct would be marked out by it far more accurately by instinct, and that end would thereby have been obtained much more reliably than can ever be done by reason. So what's he saying here? If our goal, as human beings will say, was for our preservation, prosperity, and happiness, then instinct would have been a much surer path. Instinct would have been a much more reliable path. And why is this? Well, okay, go back to our example of the beavers building the dam. Now, when you look at the beavers building the dam, as long as they're not being attacked by predators, or there's not a natural disaster, or the environment's not falling around them, they more or less seem happy. They seem fine. They seem to be having a prosperous life, right? The species seems well preserved. And they're just doing what they've been programmed by natural instinct to do. They don't feel any real anxiety or discontent. Everything seems to be going great. So on the one hand, we can come up with tons of examples in the animal kingdom, of animals that seem perfectly happy to just follow instinct. And this seems to be a much more reliable path to these goods. And in fact, Kant goes farther and he says, look, reason not only doesn't achieve these things as well as instinct, it actually works at counter purposes to achieving these things. Look, it's not that reason can never help you achieve preservation, prosperity, and happiness. But there are many ways in which reason can make you less happy. So here's how he explains this. He just makes the point that really, if nature was smart, if nature wanted to make us happy, she never would have given us reason in the way she did in the first place. Nature herself would have taken over the choice not only of ends, but also the means. And as a wise precaution, would have entrusted them both solely to instinct. And why is this? Well, here is where Kant explains why reason does a poor job of making us happy. In actual fact, we do find that the more a cultivated reason engages with the purpose of enjoying life and with happiness, so much the further does a human being stray away from true contentment. So the more you reason, the less happy, the less content you will be. And from this there arises in many, and indeed in those who are experienced in its use, a certain degree of misology, i.e. a hatred of reason. Since after calculating all the advantages they derive, skipping down a little, they still find that they have in fact just brought more hardship upon their shoulders than they have gained in happiness. And that because of this, they eventually envy rather than disdain the more common run of people, who are closer to the guidance of mere natural instinct, and who do not allow reason much influence on their behavior. So the point he's making here is that the closer we in our own lives we can get to acting by instinct, the happier we're going to be. And the easiest, simplest example I can think of this is oftentimes our purchasing behavior. So if you're like me, when you go to the store to get some basic household items, let's say you're going to go get deodorant, you go to the aisle, you look down the aisle, there are about 2,525,333 different brands of deodorant there. And you could literally spend all day comparing prices, comparing the ingredients on the back, looking online for recommendations. And in fact, in this world of online shopping, this is becoming a real problem with more and more options, with more and more comments and reviews. You can literally take up tons of your time thinking carefully about every single decision you make. And again, and I think I used this example previously as well, but think about big life decisions you need to make. Where to go to college, should this person be your significant other, what sort of career path should you choose? Think of all the anxiety, think of all the worry, think of all the stress that's associated with those decisions. And in a certain sense, think how much easier and more content and happier your life could be if someone who knew you well could just say, look, I know what's going to be best for you. Here's who you should marry. This is what career path you should take. This is where you should go to college. And in fact, for long periods of human life, well before we had more or less open liberal societies that we have today, that's how people lived. They were just a traditional way of life. You were born into your certain role. You didn't think about what your life plan was going to be. And of course, there's all sorts of bad consequences of that. It can be oppressive and horribly restrictive. But, having freedom also comes with a burden. Freedom comes with the burden of deciding what you're going to do. And deciding what you're going to do requires the use of reason. And reason can be stressful. Reason can make you extremely anxious. So there's no guarantee that by thinking carefully about your decisions, you're going to be happy. In fact, Kant says you're probably going to find the opposite to be the case. And so for that reason, he says, well, we have this ability for practical reason. And there's no guarantee that it'll bring about desirable consequences that we want, like happiness and prosperity. Now, this diagram shouldn't suggest that this never brings about desirable consequences. Sure, it does, certainly. But there's just no guarantee of it, and oftentimes reason will make you less happy. So he concludes the argument to say that the purpose of the human faculty of practical reason is not the human's preservation, prosperity, and happiness. Notice again how anti-consequentialist this is. For Mill, when we exercise our reason as moral beings, what are we thinking about? How to produce the best consequences to create the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. But Kant says, no, that can't be the purpose of our reason, because there's no real connection between reason and producing happiness in that way. Okay. Now that's the first question. So are there any purposes for which practical reason is poorly fitted? Yes. Producing preservation, prosperity, and happiness. So that still leaves the other question: what is the natural purpose for which practical reason is most fitted and most suitable? In Kant's view, the purpose of our practical reason is actually for a far worthier purpose, something much more important than our happiness. And what could that be? Well, he says the following: reason as a practical faculty, i.e. as one that is meant to influence the will, has yet been imparted to us. Its true function must be to produce a will that is good, not for other purposes as a means, but good in itself, for which reason was absolutely necessary. So we have practical reason, which can influence our will, and we can use reason to try to bring about some greater consequence for our own happiness, or maybe happiness of others. But there's no guarantee, and reason isn't really that well suited for this. So he says instead, what reason is well suited for, the reason that we have reason to influence our will, is produce intentions or a will that is good by itself. And another way to say that just is, the purpose of our practical reason is to produce a good will. A will that isn't justified or good because of the consequences it produces, but is justified or good because it's good in itself. It shines like a jewel all by itself, to recall the previous quote. So that is the purpose of our reason: to produce a good will that's good unconditionally and good all by itself, regardless of the consequences. And so here's how he explains, and now we can connect these points. We started this lesson by talking about two types of goods, the conditional and unconditional. Instinct is what causes us to pursue conditional goods, like happiness. Reason is what allows us to produce unconditional goods, like a goodwill. And therefore he concludes, this will, the goodwill, need not indeed be the only entire good, but it must yet be the highest good, and the condition of everything else, even the longing for happiness. Of course, we should try to, trying to be happy is not a bad thing. But pursuing happiness only matters only valuable insofar as you have a goodwill, which means this side of the equation matters much more. Using your reason to form a goodwill, which is an unconditional good, is something you need to do first before you can even think about being deserving of being happy. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. Once again, thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.